Now, abortion is an ever-present issue in American politics, and this year it took center stage in the presidential race since the Supreme Court overturned a federal right legalizing the procedure in 2022. Abortion restrictions and bans have taken effect in more than 20 states. Democrats saw the issue as a galvanizing one and one that would leave Donald Trump vulnerable. Monty Francis explains.
American voters went to the polls in 2022 and 2023 and delivered victories for Democrats in major races across the country by putting abortion rights at the center of their campaigns.
We won't go back!
Democrats are hoping it works again in 2024, with polls showing overwhelming support for legalizing abortion. A vast majority of Americans, or 63%, say the procedure should be legal in all or most cases, while 36% say it should be illegal.
President Donald J. Trump.
The issue has left Donald Trump in a political conundrum. He proudly takes credit for naming Supreme Court justices who struck down Roe v. Wade. And his running mate, J.D. Vance, supports a national ban on abortion, even in cases of rape and incest. But Trump himself has taken a step back, leading the Republican Party to soften its platform and adopt his belief that the issue should be left up to individual states.
The states will determine by vote or legislation or perhaps both, and whatever they decide must be the law of the land, in this case, the law of the state.
Since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022, more than 20 states have passed laws restricting or banning abortion, particularly in the South. Last November, voters in Ohio turned out in big numbers to enshrine a right to abortion in the state constitution by a double-digit margin, overturning an abortion ban passed by the Republican legislature. Democrats see it as a sign of Trump's vulnerability in a state he won twice, in 2016 and in 2020, and also as a winning issue in Democratic races across the board.
This is what democracy looks like.
To truly protect reproductive freedoms, we must restore the protections of Roe. Because you see, what the United States Supreme Court took, Congress can put back in place.
A poll in the Wall Street Journal showed that abortion is the #1 issue for a majority of suburban women in swing states. Several states have pro-choice measures on the November ballot, which Democrats hope will drive turnout and help them win the White House.
We can now bring in France 24's Annette Young, host of the 51%. Annette, great to see you. What will Trump's America look like for women this time around?
In short, promoting conservative values on issues such as abortion and gender identity at the federal level. I mean, the reality at the moment, Delano, is that not only has he got control of the Senate, he looks like he's on the cusp of gaining control of the lower house as well, and the popular vote. So that gives him enormous power to ram through a whole series of measures. I mean, as one columnist wrote in The Guardian, conservative politicians want to control a woman's access to reproductive health care. They want to control the sort of books that Americans get to read and the type of history that gets taught, and they want to control how women vote. They also will want to control whether a woman can indeed get a no-fault divorce. Watch that space, because that's going to be the next issue that's going to come up for possible legislation. The other thing I would say to readers is, and viewers rather, is to have a look at Project 2025, which it was this very conservative, far-right sort of playbook on what a Trump presidency, the second term.
He said he knew nothing about it.
And he claims not to know anything about it, but there are a lot of people who support him who do support the Project 2025, and that promotes a presidential agenda that rolls back civil and human rights and implements extremist conservative policies across every federal department and agency. For instance, it would eviscerate women's long-held right to sex equality in the workplace. It calls for the next president to rescind executive orders signed by President Lyndon B. Johnson back in the mid-1960s that prohibited federal employers from discriminating people on the basis of race and sex. There's so much up for grabs now as a result of this presidency. Obviously, everybody's looking to see, will we see a national abortion ban? Now, during the course of the campaign, Trump very much steered away from that discussion, saying it's all up to the states, so I'm not going to touch it. But again, he's surrounded by people who do support a national abortion ban, and as a result, he now has the power to push one through.
Stay with us, Annette, because I'd like to bring in Linda Robinson, Senior Fellow for Women and Foreign Policy at the Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you so much for joining us here on France 24 today. The Democrats made safeguarding democracy and abortion rights, their main rallying cries. Was this a mistake?
I don't believe it was, because women, of course, are the major subset of the electorate in terms of the people who come out to vote, 53%. So it was right. And this was a historic change to have the right to abortion taken away from women in this country after 50 years. So it was not a wrong decision. I would also say she coupled that with a very strong appeal to all Americans and pledged to govern for all, and had a very robust set of policies to help all people, and balance that gender-focused message with one to appeal across the aisle. We have to, of course, wait for some more detailed results to come out to understand exactly the factors that made that an inadequate campaign. But I do think on the basis of 3 months of campaigning, she put together a brilliant campaign. And we have to look at things like, where did the white women's vote go? Because that historically had gone Republican and gone for Trump in a plurality over the Democratic candidate.
But what can we expect now, given that it looks like the Republicans are set to take control of not just the Senate, but the House as well? And let's not forget that there's a conservative majority on the Supreme Court. So what can we expect with Trump 2.0 when it comes to women's rights in the United States?
Yes, this is really, it's a definitive outcome. It's a breathtaking outcome. It is negative for women's rights and gender equality in the United States. And I would say beyond. I think that obviously the weight of the United States on other countries will also be negative. But to focus at home, the key significance is the implementation of this very conservative program. And your colleague laid out very nicely all of the elements in Project 2025, which is definitely the conservative program of this incoming administration. Many of the former senior officials wrote chapters of the document. So Trump's denial that he had anything to do with it really doesn't stand up. The question is, now with the control of the Congress, will they go beyond the immediate issuing of a lot of troubling executive orders, which include purging the civil service of the government and putting in party loyalists? Will they begin to implement laws that really remove and roll back a lot of gender rights, diversity and equity programs? What will the courts do as some of these things come in for challenge? And particularly, the Supreme Court has already made some very sweeping rulings, as I'm sure your audience knows, with regard to giving the president a presumption of immunity for acts that are deemed official. So we're, I think, in a very alarming period to see how democracy is going to hold up and how the rights of women will hold up.
Indeed. Linda, just stay with us a second, because I'd like to bring in Annette back in once again. Annette, there were 10 states where abortion was on the ballot yesterday. How did those referendums go?
Well, basically, all of these ballot box measures aim to protect or strengthen abortion rights, except for Nebraska, which had dueling measures. It seems that measures to protect abortion access will pass, according to projections, in Arizona, Colorado, New York and Maryland. In fact, in Arizona, the amendment is expected to overturn the state's current ban on abortions 15 weeks into pregnancy, as this sort of strict 19th century type ban was about to be enforced. So voters in South Dakota apparently rejected the measures enshrining abortion, as did voters in Florida. No surprise there. But it comes back to the question you were asking, Linda, beforehand, what went wrong? There was a story floating about the last few weeks where there was a great deal of concern in the Democrats that pro-choice Republicans would vote on a state level supporting pro-choice ballot box measures, but wouldn't bring themselves to vote for Kamala Harris on a national level. And that possibly might be where they lost some of the white women's vote. Having said that, it is a bit too early to say who did what went wrong, but I'm sure that theory probably did borne out.
Linda, Kamala Harris never really, unlike Hillary Clinton, who constantly spoke about how it was her time, how she would shatter glass ceilings, Kamala Harris played down the fact that she was a woman because she is a person of color. What is it that went wrong? Do you think America's just not ready for a female president?
Well, you have raised a key question, and what I'd like to do is say there is certainly a possibility that the first Black woman presidential candidate was a bridge too far for Americans who harbor acknowledged or unacknowledged bias against women as presidents and women of color in particular. And there are global statistics, of course, that nearly half of people feel a woman is just ipso facto not suited to do the job of president or a head of government. So I think we're dealing with latent bias for sure, but we have to see really where the numbers come out. I'd like to make a comment about this bid for the Republican women and what I call the Nikki Haley voters. I think that some of them might have been. The majority of women in this country are for abortion rights. The majority of the country is for abortion rights. So I think that there's certainly ample support for Harris making this a keystone of her campaign. But I think what we will probably see is the loyalty of the Nikki Haley voters to the Republican Party, even the one so transformed by Trump that they could not bring themselves to cross over and vote for a Democrat. And of course, it did not help that Nikki Haley endorsed Trump after running against him and pointing out all of his egregious flaws and anti-women positions. So I think it's really a disappointment that the Republican Party has really seen fit to stand in lockstep with everything after not just being a convicted felon, but really the egregious kind of rhetoric and statements and threats that he's made, and threats that, frankly, we have to really see how much he's going to act on, because in the waning days of the campaign, he actually threatened to use the U.S. military against the so-called enemy within. And he named politicians like Nancy Pelosi and Adam Schiff as people who could be targets of this. So I do think that what we have is a kind of lockstep with Trump that doesn't really look at the details of issues and ignores the facts of, frankly, a more robust economy than under Trump.
Stay with us, Linda, because Annette, one thing that Donald Trump has said in recent days is that he will protect the women even if they don't want to be protected. I mean, this kind of rhetoric would typically alienate women and push women away from him, yet here we are.
Yeah, indeed. And I think obviously we need to wait for the demographic breakdown of who voted for which party to see why they did. But I think what Donald Trump and his supporters did is basically play to that very visceral part of Americans, which is fear of the other. And we saw that through their stance on immigration. And whenever I was asked this in the last few months leading up to this vote about, the idea that these illegal immigrants were coming in and assaulting American women in their homes, on their streets, or raping them and so on, I would always point out the obvious statistics, which is the same in the world over, which is the bulk of sexual assaults and rapes are carried out by perpetrators who are known to the victim. In other words, family members, colleagues, friends, ex-partners, partners, and so on. So, the reality does not fit with what that message is. And, supporting what Linda just said, I think at the end of the day, a lot of people were voting with their concerns about the economy and the immigration. But now what they're facing is a second term which is going to take America in a very, very different direction. And as I also keep saying, if you can't get it right for 51% of the population, you're not going to get it right for all those other communities as well.
And what sort of example will you set for the rest of the world? Linda, given that Trump is going to come back into office with pretty much total control, and what, for argument's sake, if he starts chipping away at women's rights, what tools do American women have to stand up to him?
Yes, well, thank you for that question, because what happens next, of course, will have to be the focus of analysis and some proposals. I would like to say just one specific point about the patchwork now of abortion rights in the country, state by state. And it's not just, as Vice President Harris made clear, it's not just the right to abortion, it's access to women's health care. So in those states where bans are in force, you are seeing already medical personnel leave, OBGYNs leave. You'll have these health deserts. And of course, women, this threat to prevent or prosecute women who travel across state lines for health care, to prosecute those who help them, to get rid of medical abortion, abortion pills sent by mail. So you're going to have an avalanche of continued deaths and medical crises. And I think that is something, given where the majority of the population is, that is going to provoke, I think, some certainly civil society organization around the issue, but I think Congress may also be forced to address it if it becomes the crisis that I think it will be. But the problem is, again, there isn't even one house. It looks like the House of Representatives will go Republican as well. So we're really going to be left to societal organization, use of the courts. And again, the courts, a lot of them have been appointed by Trump, a lot of the judges. So it's also going to be tough, but there are courts where laws that exist can be used to make appeals. But I'm afraid that it's really going to be 4 years of really a fight to hang on to the democratic principles and laws that we have, and probably an era of restoration to come after that. But it is a bleak outlook, I have to confess.
It does seem that way. Linda Robinson, thank you so much for joining us on the program today. Annette, great to see you as always.